She was not born a warrior, nor raised to be remembered by history. She began as a quiet girl in Warsaw, Poland, walking beside her father, a doctor who treated the poor, the forgotten, and most of all, the Jewish families, living in crowded tenement streets. While others whispered in fear or prejudice, her father spoke in simple truth. When a person is drowning, you don't ask who they are. You jump in and save them. Those words did not simply guide her childhood. They became the law of her soul. Life tested her early. Before she understood the weight of the world, she learned the price of compassion. Her father died treating patients no one else would touch, victims of disease and poverty. She watched Jewish families, grieving and grateful, surround his grave. As a child, she held her mother's hand and learned that some heroes do not wear uniforms, hold weapons, or shout commands. Some save lives quietly, and they pay the ultimate price without asking for praise. She learned that courage could be soft, but unbreakable. Years passed and Warsaw hummed with life. Streetcars rattled, cafes spilled music into the streets, students filled universities with ideas and arguments. Young Irena Sendler watched her world evolve, modern, hopeful, yet shadowed by hatred. Anti-Jewish prejudice grew like mold behind painted walls. Children she once played with were insulted. Businesses quietly turned Jews away, and whispers of blame became louder in a nation struggling to breathe under poverty and political stress. Irena chose not to turn away. As she grew, she became a social worker devoted to the forgotten, the poor, the sick, the unwanted. She believed help was not a question of identity, but humanity. Then the world shattered in a single morning. September 1st, 1939. Sirens screamed over Warsaw as German planes roared overhead. Streets exploded under falling bombs. People ran for shelter, clutching children, dragging belongings, hearts racing with a terror they never imagined possible. The cafes fell silent, replaced by the thunder of war. Life as Poland knew it, the songs, the laughter, the quiet pride, collapsed under a storm of steel. Occupation came swiftly. German soldiers marched through the streets, boots striking pavement with mechanical precision. New laws appeared overnight. Jewish families stripped of rights, curfews, identification armbands, ration cards, suspicion replacing trust. Fear settled in like a cold wind that refused to fade. And then walls went up. High, sealed, crowned with barbed wire and guarded by guns. The Warsaw Ghetto. A city within a city. A prison for its own people. Irena watched thousands forced into overcrowded blocks. Mothers clutching infants, fathers carrying whatever they could, children crying from hunger. People who once lived freely now herded behind walls as if their humanity could be contained by brick. Her heart did not harden, it ignited. Where others saw danger, she saw children who needed saving. Where others feared punishment, she feared doing nothing. She worked for the Warsaw Social Welfare Department, and with forged paperwork and the confidence of someone who carried righteousness as armor, she crossed into the ghetto disguised as a nurse. Disease ran rampant inside. Typhus, starvation, despair. The world pretended not to see. But she saw every starving child, every mother with hope fading in her eyes, every elderly face waiting for fate with dignity they did not deserve to lose. One day a mother inside the ghetto held a baby girl close, her hands trembling. She knew her fate. Everyone knew. She whispered to Irena, begging her to take the child. The desperation was not anger or panic. It was love, deep enough to sever its own heart. Irena's voice wavered as she promised life for the baby. The mother kissed her daughter one last time, tears falling silently, and placed her into Irena's arms. That moment became the first step on a path that had no map, only faith. Saving one child became her oath. Irena joined the resistance, not with guns or grenades, but with forged documents, secret routes, and the quiet bravery to walk past soldiers with a baby hidden in a medical bag, or under blankets in ambulances, or disguised as an illness victim being transported. The Germans feared disease. She used their fear to slip children through shadows into safety. Every child she removed needed a new identity. Every Jewish name replaced with a Christian one. But she refused to let their origins vanish. She wrote each child's Jewish name and new name on scraps of paper, then sealed those notes inside glass jars. She buried the jars beneath a tree, believing with her whole heart that when the nightmare ended, parents would return and names could be restored. She did not save nameless survivors. She saved children, whole and real, with futures worth protecting. Rumors began spreading. There is a woman helping the children. Whispers moved through the ghetto like fragile hope. Parents faced the cruelest decision imaginable: risk their child's life by keeping them, or risk never seeing them again by sending them away. Irena did not promise miracles. She promised a chance. And for thousands, a chance was salvation. She walked into danger every day. She faced guards, inspections, suspicion. She had no guarantee except her conviction. But she remembered her father's words, the ones etched in her bones, and she kept moving. She chose humanity over obedience, compassion over fear, life over silence. And with each child she carried out, she defied an empire built on terror. Her story was not of loud heroism. She did not stand on battlefields or command armies. She saved the future one child at a time, in the quiet spaces, where moral battles are fought and won, not with power, but with heart. And so it began. A war fought in shadows, carried out by a woman who believed that even in humanity's darkest chapter, light must refuse to die. The walls of the ghetto grew higher with each passing month, not just in brick and barbed wire, but in desperation. Hunger hollowed faces, winter bit through thin coats, and disease lingered like a silent predator. Inside those cramped streets, Jewish parents whispered lullabies to children whose futures they could no longer promise. Outside, life continued, but quieter, darker, as if the city held its breath. And every day, Irena returned, carrying warmth into a place designed to crush the human spirit. She walked with calm she did not always feel. Soldiers watched, their eyes cold, mechanical, trained to recognize fear. So she never showed it. Fear could betray her. Fear could betray the children hidden behind doors she knocked on, mothers she comforted, families who looked at her as if she were the last thin thread connecting them to hope. She offered them compassion, courage, and the most painful gift imaginable: a chance to save a child by letting them go. Some parents hesitated. How could they not? How do you hand the baby to a stranger? How do you trust that stranger more than yourself? But starvation leaves little room for doubt. Death casts a long shadow. And when mothers looked into Irena's eyes, they saw not a savior, not a miracle worker, but someone who refused to abandon them. Someone willing to risk her own life so their children might have one. There were moments burned into her memory, moments that no history book could ever fully hold. A toddler clinging to a doll, asked to leave it behind to avoid suspicion, as if childhood itself had to be sacrificed to survive. A small boy whispering, "Will my mama come later?" Not yet old enough to understand forever. Babies wrapped in rags, silent from hunger and exhaustion. Sometimes the children cried too young to grasp the danger. Sometimes they were eerily quiet, as if even innocence recognized the weight of war. She developed methods, a toolbox of courage disguised as practicality, hidden compartments in ambulances, secret exits through court buildings, messages smuggled in bread and medicine, children sedated so that they would not cry while being carried past guards, and always the same ritual afterwards, writing down their names, sealing their identity in slips of paper, tucking them away like seeds of life that would bloom when peace returned. Glass jars buried beneath the soil, protected not by locks or guards, but by faith that someday someone would dig them up and remember. Outside the ghetto, she placed children in convents, orphanages, and brave Polish families who risked everything to hide them. A single knock on the door from the Gestapo could mean torture, execution, or worse. Yet families opened their doors. Not all, but enough. Because even in times when cruelty ruled, humanity refused to surrender completely. But the danger grew heavier. Secrets have weight, and the more she carried, the more it pressed upon her. She changed routes constantly, disguised her movements, hid even her thoughts behind calm eyes and steady hands. But she was not immune to fear. At night, fear crept in, filling the quiet like cold air beneath doors. She wondered if a single misstep would undo everything, if soldiers would drag her into the street, if the children she saved would vanish with her. Courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was walking forward in its shadow. Rumors reached German ears, whispers of children disappearing, files marked with suspicion. The resistance network tightened. Every day felt like a thread stretched thinner. And still, she went in. Still she held babies with trembling fingers disguised as steady ones. Still she whispered promises she had no guarantee she could keep. Sometimes she heard stories from those inside, news of deportations, entire families suddenly gone. The ghetto gates opened not for freedom, but for trains. And the world outside wondered, pretended, or simply did not want to know where those trains led. But she knew. Everyone who listened closely knew. Smoke rising in distant fields told truths too heavy for words. Ash settling like winter snow over towns that once held laughter. Humanity was burning, piece by piece. She could not stop it, but she could save what she could carry, one child at a time. A quiet rebellion of love against the machinery of death. One evening, as dust turned Warsaw gold and gray, she paused in the street, listening to a distant sound. A child laughing. Rare. Precious. It reminded her what she fought for. Not just survival, but childhood itself. A world where children laugh without understanding the word war. She imagined the future she prayed would come. A time when those children would grow tall, attend school, fall in love, raise families, tell stories of the woman who came in the night to take them away, not as a thief of comfort, but as a giver of life. She did not dream of statues or honors. She dreamed of reunions, of jars opened, names spoken aloud again, mothers and children holding each other in sunlight instead of shadows. Yet even dreams carried guilt. She could not save everyone. Every rescued life reminded her of those she could not reach, those hidden behind walls she never breached, those whose names would never find paper or earth or memory. Sometimes she would close her eyes and see faces she had passed, voices she cannot silence with rescue, a burden she carried silently, like a second heartbeat. One night, while crossing a checkpoint, a guard eyed her too long. His gaze lingered on the medical bag she held. Inside, a baby slept, tiny chest rising and falling in soft rhythm, innocent and unaware. He stepped closer. Her pulse thundered beneath stillness. She forced herself to meet his eyes, steady, impatient, as if unsalted by the delay. The guard hesitated, uncertain, then waved her through. Only when distance swallowed the sound of boots did she breathe again. Some victories were measured not in cheers, but breaths. Danger stalked her shadow, growing bolder, sharper. The Gestapo tightened their net. Her name circulated on lists. Suspicion formed like storm clouds. She knew the day might come when her courage would meet its price. And yet she did not stop. Because she could not. Because when a child's life hung in the balance, hesitation was betrayal. She continued walking through those streets, between worlds, one of death and one of fragile hope, carrying futures in her arms, hidden beneath fabric, prayer, and determination. She did not change history in a single moment. She changed it in thousands of small, unnoticed acts. Each act a rebellion, each life saved a victory no empire could erase. By then, she had rescued hundreds, then over 1,000, then more. Each life a thread in a tapestry of defiance. Each name buried safely beneath the earth, waiting for a tomorrow she refused to stop believing him. And still the danger waited. It watched. It gathered strength in silence, preparing the moment to strike. Soon, it would. But for now, she walked through the night again. Quiet, determined, carrying one more life away from a fate too dark for memory. And with every step, she whispered in her heart the same vow she made the first day she entered the ghetto. I will not let them drown. War sharpened its teeth on the bones of the innocent, and the city felt it everywhere. Streets once filled with merchants and music now echoed only boots, hunger, and whispers of doom. Rumors moved like wind through the walls of the ghetto. More deportations, more families taken. Fewer left to hope. Irena felt time tightening around her efforts like a noose. Each day that passed, the children grew weaker, the guards grew harsher, and the clock towards annihilation ticked louder. She knew the pattern now. A knock on a door, a plea in a mother's voice, a child lifted into her arms like something fragile and sacred. Sometimes the mothers kissed their children goodbye with silent tears, afraid that words would break their courage. Sometimes they stood very still, watching with hollow eyes as their last living treasure slipped from their grasp, trusting a stranger because trust was all they had left. She wished she could offer them reunion. She wished she could offer certainty. But war spares no guarantees. All she could offer was the smallest, fiercest candle in the dark, a chance to live. The network around her grew, as did the danger. Priests, nuns, brave ordinary citizens, all risking death for children not their own. Each person a quiet soldier in a war fought not with bullets, but with conscience. They forged baptism certificates, hid babies in laundry carts, taught children Christian prayers so they could survive interrogations. Even the smallest ones learned to stay silent, to trust hands that trembled only from responsibility, never fear. Some nights, Irena sat alone with her list, the names that meant everything to her. Small pieces of paper she guarded more fiercely than her own life. If she died, if the wrong hands found them, the children would vanish into history's smoke. So she buried the jars deeper, prayed over them like seeds waiting for spring, and returned each dawn to the gates of hell willingly, because someone had to. But evil watches those who challenge it. One autumn morning, when leaves had begun to fall like tired soldiers, the Gestapo came. They burst through her door with the cold efficiency of wolves, papers overturned, furniture smashed, rough hands gripping her arms. She felt the moment like a cold blade, not shock, but inevitability. Even courage has a heartbeat, and hers raced like a drum trapped inside a cage. They dragged her into a prison where hope struggled to breathe. The walls were thick, but not as thick as the fear inside them. She was beaten, questioned, beaten again. Boots, fists, questions. Pain meant to break the spine of her mission. But she carried her secret like steel beneath skin. Children's lives rested behind her silence. She refused to speak. Her jaw bled, bones cracked, but no name escaped her lips. Every strike she endured was a shield around the child somewhere sleeping safely. Guards threatened her with execution. They told her they knew everything. They lied, hoping fear would loosen her resolve. But she remembered her father's voice. She remembered mothers handing her babies with the kind of trust that demands sacrifice. She remembered tiny hands clutching her clothes, the solemn eyes of children who had already seen more sorrow than any lifetime owed. So she kept her silence. Pain passed like storms. Duty remained. And then, a miracle disguised as strategy. The resistance bribed the bard.
money exchanged hands, silence wrapped itself around secrets, and one night she was led from her cell into darkness. They staged her death. Her name appeared on execution lists. Posters announced her shooting. To the world, she had been killed. To the enemy, she no longer existed. To the network, she was a ghost, free but hunted, unable to appear in public, living in shadows for the remainder of the war, but alive. And alive meant she could continue. Though her body bore the wounds of torture, her spirit did not fracture. She returned to her work quietly, carefully, continuing to shepherd children through danger until the ghetto walls no longer held life, only memory and ash. She could not stop it, but she could save what she could carry, one child at a time. A quiet rebellion of love against the machinery of death. Even after liberation, her task was not done. The jar still lay buried beneath soil that now held ghosts. When the war ended, she dug them up one by one. The earth had protected them. Paper crinkled with age, but names remained. She wept reading them, not tears of weakness, but of reverence. Each name a heartbeat, each name a victory that no empire could erase. And with those names, she began searching for parents who might return to reclaim their children. Though the world had already told the truth, most parents were gone. Most families no longer existed. The children she saved had lost more than she could ever return. But they had life. They had a future. And that mattered more than anything. The world slowly rebuilt itself. Buildings rose where ruins stood. Streets filled again with laughter that...
The world slowly rebuilt itself. Buildings rose where ruins stood. Streets filled again with laughter that sounded at first too loud, too hopeful, almost fragile. Yet healing began, and those children grew. They learned, they lived, they married, they had children of their own. Generations born from her defiance. Lives that existed because she refused to surrender humanity when humanity was under siege. She never called herself a hero. Heroes, in her mind, were the mothers who let their children go, the families who opened their doors, the resistance fighters who risked death so a child might live. She saw herself as a person who simply did what needed to be done when the world looked away. She carried humility like armor, humility more powerful than pride. Years later, when asked why she did what she did, she answered quietly, as she always lived, "Because I was taught that if someone is drowning, you must try to save them, whether you can swim or not." In that sentence lived her childhood, her father, the ghetto, the jars, the scars, the courage, the grief, and the triumph. She was one woman, one life, but the world is different because she walked through it. Millions breathe freely because she refused to let innocence drown. And long after the war's roar faded into memory, her story rose, not like a shout, but like a whisper that refused to die. Proof that even when darkness fills the world, one heart refusing to break can become light enough to guide thousands. She did not save the world, but she saved worlds, little worlds held in small hands, each one now grown and living, loving, breathing proof that goodness can survive even when surrounded by unimaginable cruelty. And in the quiet of history, courage like hers echoes the loudest. Time moved slowly after the war, as if the world struggled to remember how to breathe. The ruins of Warsaw stood like broken ribs around the heart of the city, every building carrying scars, every street holding ghosts. Trees grew through shattered windows, grass pushed through cracked stone, and life, fragile but determined, began to stretch towards sunlight again. Yet the wounds inside people were deeper than rubble. Loss lived in their eyes, in the tired way they walked, in the quiet with which they spoke. Survivors did not rejoice. They endured. They picked up the pieces of lives that war had scattered like dust. Irena walked through those streets quietly, not as a savior returning to glory, but as a woman carrying invisible funerals in her heart. Children she had saved returned to her in memory, tiny hands in hers, scared eyes blinking under blankets, whispered promises made in darkness. She wondered where they were now,
She wondered which ones had grown tall, which ones remembered her face, and which ones carried the weight of not knowing where they came from. Saving lives did not erase pain. It simply gave pain a future where healing might one day live. Families came searching, hoping. Some found the names in her jars, trembling fingers tracing pen strokes that connected them to a past not fully gone. But many jars opened to silence, names without parents left to claim them, children without roots left to plant themselves somewhere new. Irena stood there watching joy and grief collide in the same breath, knowing that salvation and sorrow sometimes walk hand in hand. She could bring life, but she could not return what war had stolen forever. Those children went on to live in homes across Poland and the world. They became teachers, doctors, parents, grandparents. Some discovered their origins as adults and wept, not because they were saved, but because they suddenly understood the magnitude of what it meant to be chosen over death. They carried both gratitude and loss, pride and ache, life and longing. Many spoke her name in private prayer. Many never met her, but felt her like a flame passed through generations. They did not owe her their gratitude. She never sought it, but they carried it anyway, like a quiet blessing. As years turned into decades, the world changed. Countries rebuilt, alliances shifted, people tried to forget war, even as monuments rose to ensure they never could. Time, indifferent and relentless, marched forward. And Irena lived quietly among those years, a humble woman with hands that remembered holding lives like glass. She married, worked, raised children, taught about compassion not through speeches but through daily kindness. She did not show her scars. She did not wear her bravery like a medal. She lived like someone who knew the value of an ordinary morning, a peaceful street, a child laughing without fear. For a long time, almost no one knew her story. The world, busy rebuilding itself, overlooked her. Heroes are sometimes wrapped in silence, not spotlight. And she did not mind. She believed she had done only what any human should do. In her eyes, she did not fight evil. She helped children. That was all. And that was enough. She never lifted her chin in pride. She never demanded a place in history books. She carried her mission like a candle sheltered by both hands, steady, gentle, sacred. But history has a way of finding truth, even when truth sits quietly in a small Warsaw apartment. Years later, long after the war dust had settled and the children she had saved had grown families of their own, a group of students discovered her story while researching unsung heroes. They were amazed. They expected books filled with her name, statues in her honor, films about her courage. Instead, they found almost nothing. Silence where history should be loud. They decided silence was unacceptable. And so the world began to learn. Journalists called her, historians visited, survivors whispered her name to their grandchildren. The story of the woman who saved 2,500 children began to rise not with fanfare, but with awe. People who believed humanity had failed during those years found in her proof that even in darkness, goodness fights, quietly, stubbornly, gently. And sometimes, goodness wins. Yet when honors came, medals offered, awards given, she accepted them with the same humility she lived by. She always said the same thing, that she did nothing extraordinary, that she simply listened to her conscience, that anyone would have done the same. And perhaps that was what made her greatness different. She never believed she was great. She believed she was human, and humanity, when true, is capable of astonishing grace. She lived to see many of the children she saved grow old. She saw their children and their children's children, generations who breathed because she refused to let hate be the final word. She lived to a world that, though imperfect, learned from the ashes she walked through. And every time she looked into a young face, alive and full of possibility, she knew her father had been right. Drowning souls should always be saved, not questioned. Age finally came to her gently, like an old friend. She did not seek glory in her last years. Instead, she rested in the quiet knowledge that she had given the world more than she received. She looked back not with pride, but with gratitude. Gratitude that she had been given the strength to act, the courage to endure, and the heart to love children that were not hers, but became hers in destiny. When she finally slipped from this world, she left not just memories, but legacies. Not just stories, but lives. The children she saved lived on, and so did their children, and theirs after them. Every birthday candle they blew, every diploma they held, every hand they reached for in love, each moment echoed her name. She did not simply survive history. She shaped it, quietly, tenderly, bravely. And though she never thought herself a hero, the world eventually learned to call her one. Her life became proof that in humanity's darkest hours, a single heart, determined and gentle, can save not only bodies, but futures. A reminder that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "I cannot let you go," and carries a child into the light. The world remembers wars through battles and leaders, ruins and victories. But sometimes the greatest victory is a life saved in silence. Sometimes the strongest soldier is someone who carries children, not weapons. And sometimes the most powerful act in history is simply refusing to let another soul drown.